Have you ever looked really closely at a dandelion? Because what I thought was one yellow-headed flower is actually a whole array of tiny florets. And as the flower dries and matures, the parts of the plant under the florets will retract and will be left a wonderful array of single fruited seeds, each with their own tiny parachute of fine hairs. And didn't we all as children, and don't you children too, still like to pick up a dandelion when it's got its full seed head on and blow it out and let your wishes just go up to the heavens? Even without children helping, dandelions do a great job of launching their seeds out into the wind to take root and blossom elsewhere. And by midsummer, we're going to see those yellow heads nodding in the cracks of pavements and in the stony ditches along the roads and in the refined soils of our gardens and on our lawns. Nature casts its seeds abundantly and randomly and so effectively. Jesus told parables about nature and agriculture when he wanted to teach the people. And so this morning, we've got this wonderful story of the sower describing how some would listen and hear the word of God and take it to heart, and others who weren't quite ready to receive the word. The first time we read this through, we might assume that the parable seems to be about the soil. Soil so hard that it won't accept the seed, and the birds come and have a feast. Soil that's shallow, so the seeds sprout up, and then as the summer heat comes, they wither away. Soil that's prepared to sustain the seeds, but there's so many weeds around, they just choke out the seedlings. And sometimes good soil that nurtures the seeds and produces a harvest beyond the farmer's wildest dreams. When we interpret the parable this way, then we see ourselves as the soil, and we either are rocky, hard soil producing little, or rich, dark earth with full spiritual lives. And we begin to sort ourselves and our church friends and our neighbors into categories. Hard people, rocky people, weedy people, and spiritual people. We base it on their potential for fruitfulness. But focusing just on the soil makes us judgmental. And that can lead to unhealthy complexes. Either we raise ourselves above others, thinking I am the world's best soil, or we're burdened down with the guilt about the soil of our past. Folks, soil can't amend itself. Now, a gardener can clear the rocks and pull the weeds and add fertilizer, but on its own, soil can't change. So what if we shift our perspective from inspecting the soil to considering the sower? Parables are open riddles. They invite us to look for a multiple of meanings. If the parable is about the sower, then what does that teach us about our life and about God? You notice in the story that the sower is always on the move, joyfully throwing seed everywhere, flinging it with abandon on all of life's pathways, into the rocky ditches, amongst the weeds, and into the prepared fields. To us, this seems so imprudent. Now, when Frank and I reseed our lawn, we very carefully raked, dethatched, and then we sprinkle the seed just on the bare paths and cover it up with hay and then water it. We're very good stewards of limited resources. But this sower seeds everywhere, randomly and abundantly. What if the sower represents God and the seed represents God's grace? The sower is not ever worried about running out of seed. The sower is not worried about success or failure, or good soil or bad soil. The sower is reckless with goodness and wonderfully wasteful with grace. The sower casts seeds of love and hope and joy and peace that fall like rain on the just and on the unjust. Those seeds of grace fall on people who are hard as nails, wrapped up in their protective shells to protect their hearts. They fall on people who are rocky, whose lives are full of gossip, telling tales about other people, or who can drink the whole neighborhood under the table, or who can cuss up a storm. God wildly sows seeds without an eye to the soil that we are. The seeds of grace even fall on us if careers and cars and debt and distracting desires threaten to choke out our very life. And sometimes the seed even falls on good soil and grows with passion. If the story is about the sower, then we are called to be like the sower, throwing away our seeds of joy and hope and love and grace and mercy and not holding back. Not sharing our seeds just with people we think can help grow the church or make our congregation prosperous. In the parable, 75%, 3/4 of the seed appears to be wasted. In our lives, we're not going to be able to balance the seed and the harvest. Even Jesus had a very small initial harvest. Thousands of people turned up to hear him. So many people came out on that day that he had to get in a boat and go just offshore so that he could be seen and heard. And yet, who actually followed him closely? Only 12. And they struggled with their faith growth. None of us. Even if we think that our lives is basically good soil, sprang up full of fruit, we all had help. God's grace fell on us like the arms of a mother's nurturing love and like a father's protection. Seeds of hope and promise were planted by our teachers, and somewhere along the line, a mentor coached us when we were just seedlings, pushing aside the weeds with words of encouragement. And at times of struggle, somewhere, someone watered our thirsty soul with God's love. I remember when I was a very young mother with 3 small children. 3 little ones that seemed to have an endless case of colds and flus and earaches. And we lived just on one salary at that time, and so there was times that you had to stand at the checkout line and decide if it was going to be the vegetable oil or the chicken this week. What could you put off to the next week? And when the car started to make weird noise, you just turn up the radio because you're not ready for the next mechanic's bill. I often worried myself sick trying to control my children's health and the family budget and the unexpected expenses. I had a good friend, Marty, who taught me how to pray and release my burdens to God. She too had a house full of small children who were always getting sick and lived on a tight budget, and she too was trying to prepare for unexpected challenges. I don't remember the words that she used that day. What I remember is sitting around the kitchen table drinking tea, watching the kids play, and feeling weighed down. And sometime in that conversation that we had together, she reminded me that I was loved by God, that God wanted a relationship with me, and that I didn't have to struggle and carry these burdens on my own. I could lay them down. In that moment, the seed of God's grace fell on me. Not because I was good soil, not because I deserved it, just because God is reckless with goodness and wonderfully wasteful with grace. If this parable is about the sower, then we are called to sow the seeds of love and hope and joy and peace, just as my friend did for me. We are called to remind people that they are loved by God and that they can lay their burdens down at Jesus' feet because a relationship is desired. We are called also to be reckless with goodness and wonderfully wasteful with grace. At the conference this week, Rev Albert Mosley, the president of Gammon Theological Seminary, offered us a retelling of the parable of the sower. He told it this way. A farmer went out to sow seed. And he started off walking quite nicely down the nicely prepared furrows of his field, throwing seed to the left, throwing seed to the right. When he got to the end of the field, he just kept right on walking, right down the row. Again, throwing his seed to the left and throwing his seed to the right, and it fell on the garbage and the litter in the ditch. He kept walking right into town, throwing his seed around, and some of it fell on homeless people, and they ate it. Some of it fell on the drug dealers, and they tried to smoke it. Some of it fell on the church steps, and the church leaders came out and swept it away. Some of it, though, fell in the community garden, and it grew, and a bountiful harvest grew, enough to feed all the hungry city dwellers. The farmer slung seeds of love and hope and joy without regard to where it would land. He was reckless with goodness and wonderfully wasteful with grace. God works in these weird, unexpected ways and gives us a harvest beyond our imagination. In London, after the Second World War, after the Blitz, large craters were created all over the city from the bombs, the incendiary bombs exploding. After the rubble was cleared away, botanists discovered that plants and flowers long thought extinct for over 200 years in the city were growing in that crater. It seems that the concentrated nitrogen in these pits regenerated the seeds, the long dormant seeds, and they bloomed with renewed energy and beauty. We just don't know where the best soil is or how God will work to increase the yield. We are called to scatter seeds everywhere. As you came into worship this morning, you were given a seed packet. On one side, it's an actual package of seed, and on the other side is an affirming verse. I challenge you to randomly give away that packet this week. If you go out to dinner, give that packet to your waiter or waitress and ask them as you prepare to say grace if you can pray for something in their lives. Give it to the checkout person. Give it to your child's teacher as a blessing. Tuck it in a note and send that note off to a friend. Use it to invite someone else to church or to Bible study or to vacation Bible school or a movie night. These packets of seeds are a visible reminder that we are called to be reckless with goodness and wonderfully wasteful with grace. Jesus taught through parables, and God continues to teach us through nature. Dandelions will grow in the crack of a sidewalk. They'll come out from under concrete foundations. They'll grow on ditches and on your lawn. Dandelions associate with all sorts of others. They're happy to flourish alongside raspberries or roses, carrots and cucumbers. Dandelions are generous plants. Their long tap roots reach down deep into the earth and bring up the nutrients for the other plants beside them. Every part of a dandelion is edible. The head is good for making dandelion syrup, and the leaves can be served in salad, and the roots are an ingredient in root beer. When the wind blows, the dandelion seeds are sent out randomly, abundantly, and effectively, flourishing without regard to property lines or cultural lines or city bylaws. The next time you see that sunny weed growing happily and tenaciously in an inhospitable environment, let it remind you of the power and tenacity of God's gospel. Remember that the words that all of you speak for Christ are like the dandelion seeds. They may take root in the most unexpected places. Amen.